Last week I posted a very long video analyzing the Greater Will, but in that analysis I may have made a huge mistake. My entire analysis was based on the assumption that the Greater Will is a sentient, intelligent life form of incredible power, capable of independent decision-making with its own personal motivations and biases. And not only that, but I also assumed that it cares about what is happening in the lands between. It cares about what form the Golden Order takes. It directly influences the course of events here. But what if all of that is wrong? What if the Greater Will does not care about what form Order takes, just so long as Order is present and consistent? And even stranger, what if the Greater Will is nothing more than the divine essence of Order, still incredibly powerful but mindless and formless? What if it is actually a kind of fundamental force or energy spread throughout the universe, giving structure and form to matter, but not choosing what shape that form takes? Sort of like gravity. It is everywhere, it affects every aspect of our lives, but it is not alive, it does not make decisions, it is not capable of formulating plans or becoming angry. In that video, I also assumed that the Greater Will must have had a hand in crafting the Golden Order that currently dominates the lands between, and therefore it would at least be partially responsible for any abuses inflicted on the population by the Golden Order, like the persecution of the Omens and the Misbegotten. But what if I was wrong? What if the Golden Order is entirely the creation of Queen Marika, without any intervention by any higher power? What if she was the one who decided to wage a genocidal war against the Fire Giants, to conquer the lands between, to persecute the Omens and the Misbegotten? Then she would be personally responsible for much of the suffering and anguish in this setting, marking her as the true antagonist of the story. This would also mean that, when she shattered the Elden Ring and thus broke the Golden Order, she was not heroically breaking a tyrannical outer god's stranglehold on her kingdom, but was instead more like a child petulantly breaking her own toy to prevent anyone else from being able to play with it. When I posted that video, there were a ton of comments that made really compelling arguments that my understanding of the Greater Will and its relationship to the Golden Order was mistaken, and I thought it was a really fascinating discussion and I wanted to explore it further. So the purpose of this video is to take a second and deeper look into the topic, to gather all of the textual evidence I could find that directly describes the Greater Will, to have a serious discussion about how it is being portrayed, and to figure out whether the writers want us to believe the Greater Will is a sentient, intelligent being, or whether they intended it to just be the essence of Order, mindless and uncaring, or some sort of complicated combination of the two. In this video, we are going to examine 8 pieces of textual evidence, and I've ordered them from least to most important. First, the dialogue of the Three Fingers. Second, the dialogue of Berhnal, the Recusant. Third, the opening cinematic. Fourth, the punishment of Queen Marika. Fifth, the Nox armor item descriptions. Sixth, the Elden Star's Incantation item description. Seventh, the Elden Beast itself. And 8, and I believe the most important textual evidence for understanding the true nature of the Greater Will and its connection to the Golden Order, the dialogue of the Two Fingers. Alright, let's get started with the first one, the dialogue of the Three Fingers. So let's listen to a bit of that dialogue together, and as you listen, ask yourself, what is being revealed about the Greater Will's true nature here? Okay, here it is.
I have touched them. The words of the Three Fingers. As your maiden, allow me to divine them. All that there is came from the one great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. But the Greater Will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned, melted all away with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again.
If we trust the Three Fingers, and that is a big if, since there is a lot of deception surrounding the operations of the Three Fingers, but if we do trust them, then this dialogue seems to reveal not only the origins of the Greater Will, but the origins of everything. Once upon a time, all the matter and energy in this universe was collected together in something called the One Great. And then, for reasons which are not revealed to us, the One Great began to fracture and divide, and then life arose. Perhaps the Greater Will was responsible for fracturing the One Great, or perhaps the Greater Will was born from the One Great's already fractured corpse. Either way, during this process, the Three Fingers claim that the Greater Will made a mistake, and supposedly this mistake is responsible for all suffering in the world. We are not told what this mistake was, so we can only make guesses. My assumption is the mistake was bringing order and structure to the universe in the first place, which allowed life to arise. Because so long as life exists, suffering will inevitably exist too. By creating the conditions in which life could emerge, the Greater Will unintentionally created the possibility of suffering. I find this dialogue both super fascinating and equally frustrating. We are getting a tiny little sliver of an explanation of the origin of the universe, of the birth of the Greater Will, of the beginning of life, but it is so limited. We are given so few details. Whatever its true nature, the Greater Will was born of something older and bigger than itself, the One Great, and is perhaps fated to one day rejoin that older and bigger something. Perhaps order is only a temporary force in the universe. Someday everything will be chaotic and structureless again. But we're getting off topic here. Unfortunately, this dialogue does not answer any of our questions about the Greater Will's true nature. Is it an intelligent life form? Does it care what happens in the lands between? Is it just a mindless force spreading order throughout the universe? So to find answers, let's move on to the second piece of evidence. This is Berhnal. He is a recusant of the Volcano Manor, which means he is someone who has dedicated his life to challenging the authority of the Two Fingers and the Greater Will they serve. At one point, he actually speaks directly to the Greater Will. So let's listen to that together now.
O Greater Will, hear my voice. I am the recusant Berhnal, inheritor of my brother's will, and you will fall to my blade. We refuse to become your pawns. Consider this fair warning.
I find this dialogue to be really interesting. This guy is speaking to the Greater Will as if it can hear and understand him, as if it will care what he is saying, and craziest of all, he believes that he can hunt down and kill the Greater Will with his blade. Now, if we believe him and assume that he's not just insane or mistaken, then the Greater Will must have some material living form that can be harmed by physical weapons. Of course, he might just be crazy, or he might have no idea what the Greater Will actually is. Berhnal is not an objective or expert source of information on the topic. In this dialogue, he never actually says anything about the true nature of the Greater Will, or what its motivations are, or whether it has any motivations at all. We still have not found any answers to our questions. So let's move on to the third piece of evidence, the opening cinematic. The opening cinematic does mention the Greater Will by name, but we're not going to watch it together because the narrator in this cutscene just speaks way too slowly, and I don't want to waste your time, so I'll just read it to you. This is what he says. The great Elden ring was shattered. In our home, across the fog, the lands between. Now, Queen Marika the Eternal is nowhere to be found. And in the night of the Black Knives, Godwyn the Golden was first to perish. Soon, Marika's offspring, demigods all, claimed the shards of the Elden Ring. The mad taint of their newfound strength triggered the shattering. A war from which no lord arose. A war leading to abandonment by the Greater Will. In my previous video, I assumed that abandonment implied intelligence. Like, if you're abandoning something, that means you are choosing to abandon it, and if you're making a choice, you must be intelligent. But maybe not. Some commenters made a compelling argument that, and I did mention this possibility in the video too, if the true nature of the Greater Will is the essence of order, then it would probably be naturally repelled by disorder and chaos. The shattering was an extremely chaotic civil war, which could have led the Greater Will's influence to wither away away, not by choice, but just by natural processes. Whenever order is restored, then the greater will also presumably be restored too, because it exists wherever order exists. I also assumed that the line in the opening cinematic meant that the greater will had abandoned the entire lands between. Multiple commenters on the previous video suggested that I had misinterpreted the line, that actually the greater will only abandoned the demigods. This would mean that the two fingers were correct when they said that the greater will had not abandoned the realm, and also that the two fingers may have been correct in their belief that the greater will wanted a tarnished to become the next Elden Lord. In that case, the real reason we initially fail to enter the Erd Tree is not because the greater will locked the door before leaving, but because the tree has been sealed by someone else, someone who is defying the greater will's commands for their own personal reasons. A lot of people in the comments suggested that this person is Radigan, since the pattern on the Erd Tree's seal matches the pattern on his statues. Maybe he does not want his position of Elden Lord to be taken by anyone else, and is willing to defy the greater will to prevent that from happening. But we're getting off topic again. The text in the opening cinematic is also inconclusive. Maybe the greater will made a conscious decision to abandon the demigods or the lands between or whatever, or maybe it was naturally repelled by the chaos of the shattering. We still don't have any answers, so we have to move on to the fourth piece of evidence, the punishment of Queen Marika. Alright, at one point the player can ask Enya about the current status of Queen Marika, and this is how she and the two fingers respond.
But after the Elden Ring's shattering, she was imprisoned in the Erd Tree, a grim punishment for shattering the Order, despite her godhood. The fingers speak.
Marika's trespass demanded a heavy sentence. But even in shackles, she remains a god and the vision's vessel.
According to this dialogue, Queen Marika was punished by someone or something for her crime of shattering the Elden Ring, but it does not say who actually punished her. When we finally enter the Erd Tree, we find Marika impaled by a spear, strung up by a rune, and sealed away. Remember, she is a god and extremely powerful, so whoever did this to her must be even stronger than her. In my previous video, I assumed that she had been punished by the greater will. And if it's doling out punishments for rule breaking, it must be both intelligent and it must care about what's going on in the lands between, right? Except maybe not. Let's assume that I was wrong and that someone else was responsible for doing this to her. Is there any other possible candidate, someone with both the power and motivation to cripple Queen Marika? Well, yes, actually there is. The Elden Beast. Remember, the Elden Beast is the living form of the Elden Ring. When Marika tried to shatter the Elden Ring, in doing so, she was also attacking the Elden Beast. Maybe it retaliated, defended itself. Maybe it defeated her in battle and then strung her up from that rune as punishment, sealed her inside the Erd Tree as its own personal captive. The only problem here is Radigan, who seems to have taken control of Marika's body and who definitely tried to repair the Elden Ring. But maybe he just got caught up in the Elden Beast's wrath. So, once again, this piece of evidence is inconclusive. The greater will may not have had anything to do with Marika's current captivity. We must look elsewhere for answers. Which brings us to our fifth piece of evidence, the Nox armor item descriptions, which read, long ago, the Nox invoked the ire of the greater will, and were banished deep underground. Now they live under a false night sky, in eternal anticipation of their liege, of the coming age of the stars and their lord of night. This one is much more definitive. It does not say they invoked the ire of the Two Fingers or of Queen Marika or of the Golden Order. They invoked the ire of the greater will. Assuming that they are using ire in the usual sense of the word, this means that the greater will is an emotional being. It gets upset when people plot against it, which is exactly what the Nox were doing, creating the Finger Slayer blade, a weapon with the power to harm it and its envoys. This implies that the greater will does care what the people of the lands between are doing. I mean, at bare minimum, it cared enough to get angry with the Nox. This description does not say who actually did the banishing. It may have been Queen Marika, or the Two Fingers, or someone else operating on the Greater Will's behalf. I think this, while small and not entirely conclusive, is the first compelling evidence of the Greater Will's true nature that we have encountered, but there is still more evidence to examine. Next, let's take a look at the item description of the Elden Star's Incantation. It reads, "It is said that long ago the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring." In my previous video, I assumed that this also implied intelligence. Like, if it is sending golden stars shooting across the universe, it must be making a conscious choice to do so, right? But I saw some comments on the previous video stating otherwise. They argued that the people of the lands between themselves do not understand the Greater Will. They worship it as if it were a god. They mistakenly ascribe events to its influence or desires, not realizing that, in truth, the Greater Will does not care about them or their lives. They argue that the Greater Will did not consciously send the Elden Beast to the lands between. Instead, the Elden Beast arrived in the lands between as a natural consequence of the fundamental cause and effect structure of the universe, for which the Greater Will, as the divine essence of order, is ultimately responsible for but not actively manipulating. It would be sort of like if we worshipped and prayed to gravity every time an asteroid struck the Earth. Sure, gravity is technically responsible for that asteroid showing up, but it did not make a conscious choice to send the asteroid to us, because gravity is not capable of making conscious choices. It is not alive. It would be silly or ignorant to use an asteroid strike as evidence of gravity's intelligence or intentions. Maybe the Greater Will is something similar. But let's talk about these item descriptions. Something that a lot of people don't realize about Elden Ring and the Souls genre is that this form of storytelling through item descriptions is a form of third-person omniscient narration. Remember your English classes, when your teacher taught you about the different points of view from which a story can be told. Stories always have narrators. Those narrators can be first person, second person, or third person. The narrator can be omniscient, meaning it knows absolutely everything that is happening in the story and even what is happening inside the characters' heads. Or it can be limited, meaning that the narrator's knowledge is incomplete. The narrator can be objective or subjective. It can be a character in the story, or it can exist entirely outside of the story. It can be unreliable. It can tell lies and half-truths. So what kind of narrator do we find in these item descriptions? The speaker or narrator of these little snippets is unnamed and undefined, but appears to be nearly omniscient. Seems to know everything that has ever happened in the lands between. However, the speaker often uses uncertain language, saying things like, "It is said that blah blah blah," or "according to legend blah blah blah." This speaker is either unwilling or unable to tell us exactly what is true and what is false. It means that the audience can never be certain what is actually going on. We are always basing our understanding of the story on rumors and legends and fables, which can be frustrating. Just take that last item description as an example. Sure, it is said that long ago the Greater Will sent a golden star, but who is saying that? And what evidence are they basing the claim on? And what if they're wrong? We are left adrift in a sea of uncertainties, but without any other alternatives, we have no choice but to cling to what little information is presented by this narrator, no matter how potentially unreliable, because otherwise we would have no solid ground to plant our feet on. My point is that when I'm analyzing the story of Elden Ring, I am choosing to trust this narrator, to assume that whatever they're saying is the factual, objective truth. When the narrator says, "The Greater Will became irate with the Nox, the Greater Will sent the Elden Beast to the lands between," I'm going to base my analysis on the assumption that this is true, and that the words mean what they appear to mean, that this is not a misinterpretation or mistake by the people of this fictional world, because otherwise we would be lost. And for that reason, I find this item description to be compelling textual evidence that the Greater Will is a being capable of making choices, capable of sending golden stars across the cosmos, and of choosing their destinations, meaning that it is an intelligent and conscious being. Of course, other players are free to treat the narration and the item descriptions with more suspicion or more open interpretations, and if you do that, you are going to come to very different conclusions. But let's move on to the next piece of evidence. Okay, so the Elden Remembrance description explicitly states that the Elden Beast is the living incarnation of order. And the Elden Beast is definitely alive. It appears to be intelligent. It is at least smart enough to kick my fat ass up and down this arena 7,000 times in a row. Besides Malenia, no other boss in Elden Ring gave me more trouble than this floppy douchebag jellyfish who constantly runs away to the other side of the stadium every single time I get close to him. But anyway, what this means is that concepts like order can have living incarnations in this setting. When you look at the example of a stele, it appears that stars can have physical living forms too. Maybe the Greater Will is a star. Even if the Greater Will is nothing more than the divine essence of order though, it could still have a physical living form. It could still have magical powers, thoughts and emotions, biases and motivations. It could make its own choices. The fact that the Elden Beast exists at all is proof of that possibility. Maybe the Elden Beast is a creation of the Greater Will, or a child of the Greater Will, or a piece of the Greater Will, broken off and sent flying across the cosmos. But once again, we're getting off topic. To end this video, let's examine the 8th and final piece of evidence, and also what I consider to be the most compelling piece of evidence in the game: the dialogue of the two fingers. There is nothing in this game that makes me more certain that the Greater Will is not only alive and sentient, but that it cares about what's going on with the people living in the lands between. These bizarre, giant, rotting, intelligent fingers claim to be the envoys of the Greater Will. They claim to speak for the Greater Will, to communicate its wishes and commandments. They claim to commune with the Greater Will. They even ascribe emotions to the Greater Will. At one point, they actually say that the Greater Will is pleased with us. I just cannot find any way to fit their dialogue with theories that the Greater Will is either not sentient or just does not care about what's going on in the lands between. For that to be true, the two fingers would have to either be insane, just babbling nonsense, or they would have to be liars, manipulators, deceiving everyone, using their supposed connection to the Greater Will to craft a world of their own selfish desire. And while that would be a really fascinating story, I just cannot find any textual evidence to back it up. If the Greater Will was not intelligent, it could not communicate with or command the two fingers. And if it did not care, it would not have sent the two fingers to act as envoys in the lands between in the first place. So I believe we have found answers to all of our questions. Yes, the writers want us to believe that the Greater Will is sentient and intelligent. Yes, it is intended to be alive and might even have a physical form. Yes, the writers do intend for us to believe that it cares about what is happening in the lands between, that it feels emotions, that it can be angry or pleased. No, the writers did not portray it as just some formless energy mindlessly binding matter together without any conscious purpose. But there's still one question left. What is the Greater Will's connection to the Golden Order? What influence did it have over the current incarnation of the Golden Order? Did it have any influence at all? Can we just blame Queen Marika or maybe Radagon for all the terrible things the Golden Order has done? Well, once again, we should examine the dialogue of the two fingers. The two fingers make a direct connection between the Greater Will and the Golden Order. They say that the Elden Ring is the root of the Golden Order, and as we know from the Elden Remembrance, the Greater Will sent the Elden Ring to the lands between. Without the Elden Ring, there is no Golden Order, and without the Greater Will, there is no Elden Ring. which means that Marika or Radigan or whoever did not craft the Golden Order entirely on their own. They needed the power of the Greater Will to do it. They needed the Elden Ring as a foundation upon which to construct their order. But what about the Mending runes? How do they fit into all this? Multiple people in the comments of the previous video used the existence of the Mending runes as evidence that the Greater Will does not care what form Order takes in the Lands Between, just so long as that order is consistent. There are 3 Mending runes in the game, each manifested by a different character. The purpose of these runes is to both repair and alter the Elden Ring, transform it with new ideas, and thus transform the Golden Order too. And those transformations can be really dramatic. They create totally different societies than the one Marika ruled over, such as an age where absolutely everyone is cursed, or an age where the gods have no power. It is significant that these Mending runes are compatible with the Elden Ring, despite not being original to it, and not even originating with the Greater Will, but instead with random Tarnished in the Lands Between. It is possible that even more of the great runes in the Elden Ring were not original to it, that it has already been changed in the past. For example, the image of the Elden Ring we see in Crumbling Farum Azula clearly contains runes that do not exist in its current form, and Radigan's latest rune structure seems to be missing. As multiple commenters pointed out, it seems very possible that the Greater Will was involved in the previous ages, that it also had interactions with the dragons and beastmen long before Marika's age. It seems as if the Greater Will crafted the Elden Ring with flexibility in mind, that it was intended to be modular and changeable, that whoever became its vessel or Elden Lord could have a significant amount of choice in how they used it, that each vessel and Elden Lord is allowed to reorganize society according to their own personal ideals and principles. If that is true, then maybe Marika and Radigan are far more responsible for the tyrannical nature of the Golden Order than I gave them credit for in my last video. Maybe the Greater Will gave them the tools to create any order they wanted, and they chose to build a world full of bloody warfare, subjugation, persecution, and slavery. And the Greater Will is a neutral party, though I assume that the Two Fingers would have been involved with the whole project, and that the Greater Will would have been communicating with the Two Fingers, expressing displeasure if Marika or Radigan created an order it disapproved of. So maybe we cannot absolve it of all blame quite yet. Either way, that is all of the textual evidence concerning the Greater Will's true nature I found in the game. If I missed something, do please let me know, and I probably did, because Elden Ring is such a huge game with so much hidden information, it's practically impossible to keep track of everything. As I stated in my previous video, I do still think that its true nature is probably the divine essence of order. But in the setting of this game, where even stars can have physical forms, I do not think that contradicts the possibility that it is also a living creature with a physical body and its own personal motivations. Every single time I post a new video, the comment section immediately fills up with a bunch of smart people who confront me with ideas and evidence I misunderstood or maybe never even considered at all. It always makes me feel like my videos are sort of incomplete or not as good as I wanted them to be, which is exactly how I felt about that Greater Will video after reading through the comment section, that I had made a bunch of stupid mistakes, which is why I hope this addendum video covers at least some of the gaps in that previous video, that this time I provided ample textual evidence to support my interpretation of the story, and that I have given the topic of the Greater Will's true nature as thorough a scrutiny as it deserves.